Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Public Health Scotland figures show that delayed discharge, also known as bed blocking, is at a record high. And another set of new figures reveal, according to the charity Macmillan, their words, devastating delays in cancer treatment. And right now, 1 in 7 of our fellow Scots is on an NHS waiting list. So given all of this, why does our health service not make it onto the first page of the SNP's priorities?
First Minister.
As I've explained to Parliament before, the issues that Douglas Ross raises with me of delayed discharges, which I accept are far too high, and the Government is in active dialogue with local authorities and health boards to reduce those numbers. Cancer waiting times, we're treating more patients with cancer, with increased personnel in the health service working to deliver on cancer care. And within the health service as a whole, we are allocating more resources to ensure that the health service is able to meet the rising demand, which has increased in the aftermath of COVID, with the health service occupying a much larger proportion of our budget than was the case before. But there is, of course, a link between the condition of the health service and the question of independence, and that is the question of financial control. And what worries me, and it's not just me, it's been expressed by the Institute for Fiscal Studies as well, is there a conspiracy of silence at this moment about the funding of our public services and our health service between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. And the issue is this: we are not confronting the consequences of 14 years of austerity, but for Scotland, independence is the way to do that.
Douglas Ross.
I was speaking about Macmillan saying there are devastating delays in cancer treatment and John Swinney goes for independence. And he spoke about delayed discharge and said he was in active dialogue with local authorities. Yes, that active dialogue is telling them they're getting their budgets cut yet again by this SNP Scottish Government. On the SNP's watch, Scotland's NHS waiting times are at some of their worst levels ever. They've made Scotland the drug death capital of Europe. Alcohol deaths are now at the highest level for 16 years, and life expectancy in Scotland is lower. Life expectancy in our country is lower after the 17 years of the SNP government. The SNP are bad for Scotland's health. Now, we're all sick of hearing about what's on page 1, line 1. But fixing Scotland's broken NHS is the public's priority. So why isn't it the SNP's priority?
First Minister.
Well, I think the decisions of the Government speak volumes about what priority we attach to the health service. So when this
Let's hear the First Minister.
When this Government came to office in 2007, the health service occupied about 33% of the Government's budget. Today, it is closer to 50%. Those are the decisions this Government has taken. And that has ensured that there is more funding to deal with the increased demand there is in the National Health Service. Now, when the Government had a choice last year about the allocation of consequential funding from the United Kingdom Government, we faced a choice. The consequences came for business rate support for the hospitality industry. When that money came here, Douglas Ross wanted us to spend it on the hospitality sector, and we chose to spend it on the health service. We're prepared to make the tough choices. Douglas Ross ducks them.
Douglas Ross.
John Swinney wants to get applause from the clapping seals behind him for record drug deaths in Scotland. He wants us to celebrate.
Mr. Ross. Yet again, I must draw your attention to Standing Order Rule 7.3, which tells us that we must conduct our business in a courteous and respectful manner. Do continue in that vein. Thank you.
I was just listing the point that the SNP were applauding John Swinney. The SNP were applauding John Swinney for overseeing record drug deaths in Europe. We're the worst in Europe. They applaud that. We have bed blocking at its highest ever level. They applaud that. We have people waiting on waiting lists far longer than they should. 840,000 of our fellow Scots and SNP MSPs applaud it. But it's not just our health service where the SNP have failed. They haven't upgraded the key roads that they promised they would. The A9, the A90, the A96, the A7, the A75, the A77, all of these promises broken by the SNP. The attainment gap was supposed to close. It's widened. Violent crime is up. Officer numbers are down. Scottish workers pay more in tax than the rest of the United Kingdom, and they have abandoned Scotland's oil and gas industry. From salmon to sturgeon to Swinney, all they have achieved is dividing Scotland. Isn't it time to finally draw a line under the independence debate for good?
First Minister.
One of the issues that Douglas Ross put to me was about alcohol-related deaths. Now, I want to share a quote with Parliament because this is the type of evidence that Parliament needs to chew over and consider when we're dealing with the kind of rhetoric that we hear from Douglas Ross. Professor Jerry McCartney, the Professor of Wellbeing and Economy at Glasgow University, said this, and I quote, "You see lagged effects from decades ago of urban planning, policy decisions and the 1980s economic changes and how that translated into people's alcohol deaths a decade or 2 decades later. So it is not unprecedented." I simply put that evidence to Parliament because we have to understand the consequences of the devastation wreaked on our country by the policies of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government. And just to prolong the absurdity of Douglas Ross's position, Douglas Ross has set out a manifesto this week which commits to repairing the roads, ending long NHS waits, restoring schools, making Scotland safer.
Let's hear the First Minister.
All of those 4 commitments cost more money. And then the 5th one, cut your tax. So Douglas Ross stands here, demands that we do more and demands that we spend less. It is the politics of absurdity, and Douglas Ross is welcome to all of it.
Douglas Ross.
Let's just look at that answer. Now, John Swinney is considerably older than me, but he is blaming the failures here in Scotland now to a period before I was even born, and apparently it has nothing to do with the 17 years the SNP have been in charge here in Scotland. And we know that, apart from separating Scotland from the rest of the UK, nothing else matters to John Swinney. Independence will always come first, before our NHS, before jobs, before schools, before the economy, before everything. People up and down Scotland want the focus to be on these issues, the things that really matter to them. But we all know what John Swinney wants. If it's not page 1, line 1, it's not a priority for the SNP. Right now, in 2024, the SNP's leader from 2004 is trying to take us back to the division of 2014. Scotland is stagnating under the SNP. We've had 17 years of decline and broken promises. Isn't it time to finally move on from the division of this SNP government to focus on the issues that really matter to people?
First Minister.
I don't really think Douglas Ross is in a position to go on at me about division when his colleagues behind him have told him to get out of office as leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. Oh, do they all want him to stay? Well, what I read in the newspapers was they were all in revolt. They all wanted rid of him. So, and I think my colleagues are.
Let us hear one another.
I think my colleagues are pretty happy that I'm here just now. Believe you me. And let me.
Let's hear one another.
And let me just tell Douglas Ross why independence matters. People in this country are suffering because of the...
We will hear the First Minister. Because
of the consequences of 14 years of Conservative austerity. They are suffering because of the Conservative obsession with Brexit, which is damaging our economy. They are suffering because of the cost of living crisis escalated by the ludicrous behaviour of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, which Douglas Ross wanted me to emulate. Independence is the solution to austerity, Brexit and the cost of living, and we're going to see the back of Douglas Ross as well.